3 o'clock
Well,
today.
yeah. This was
Might be
my
good
share.
to get started.
Oh.
But it's not on.
It's going to. It will.
Why is it on?
Okay, fine. Move it up.
Is it gonna hum? But I walk around
I
anyway.
know, well, by then I already eased it back. Everybody's being quiet, so
Okay,
you've got attention, so that's.
all right.
There
Sorry for the distraction up here with the technical guy.
I have a disguise as a donor.
This left table is normally a lot further back.
Take care of them. Okay, guys, so
No.
appreciate you being here. We are still working on persevering through a pandemic, faith, love, and COVID-19. Observing Jesus today. What we're going to look at. Hopefully you got a handout. If you didn't, might be some floating around here somewhere. But we will be continuing our study. Good to see all of you today.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So you remember your preachers from years ago? They preach, I mentioned this before, preach Sunday morning, teach adult class, preach Sunday night. I have more respect for them nowadays than I ever have in my life because it's tiring after preaching and then coming in here, switching gears and coming in here, and oftentimes preaching and teaching, don't actually match up totally right there. Sometimes they will, depending on the preacher, if he's good enough to do that. I'm not. So it typically doesn't match up. And then after you preach and teach, and then you come back that night and preach. And Wednesday night, from a former preacher who did all of that, Larry. Thank you so much. I tell you, I just appreciate you more than you know. It makes me really feel lazy. I see that. I got a comment.
Yeah, so from a church history perspective, in the 1800s, early 1900s, there were preachers that would preach 3 times on Sunday morning, another time on Sunday afternoon, and a couple of times in the evening, while traveling 200 miles to do so and preaching a different sermon each time. Some of those
I'm trying to make you feel better.
Well, I mean, it's just like, it's amazing what those guys do. I have a tough time with a 5-minute devo. That's mind-blowing. That's mind, you talk about what they used to.
Well, if you're traveling and you're preaching the same sermon all the time, that's one thing. That's not as difficult. But I couldn't get very far here if I preached the same sermon every week for several weeks in a row. You ought to be calling for my head. Maybe by the first week, you never, right?
5 minutes into the second week.
Like I heard the preacher say after
Watch for
preaching.
Deborah.
Watch out for Deborah.
Yael, does she have
Yael.
a hammer and a
Yael,
tin
you hear me?
stake? Luke, watch out for the milk and the covering today.
I'm going to Todd's.
Every day.
Just out of curiosity, Rhonda and I were talking about this the other night. I was telling her, I think it was Friday night, Friday night. I was talking about my lesson for today. And, I was preaching it to her at home basically and giving her some thoughts. And she said, I think I had forgotten about that story. Had any of you felt the same? Maybe you've forgotten about the story? Probably have read it before, but you forgot about it.
I didn't learn it about children's Bible class.
Honestly, the thing is, there's certain things we don't necessarily teach our children in Bible classes. There are some very graphic things. There are very graphic things, and we don't. And then oftentimes, we don't mention it from the pulpit. And so, like this one, I tried to soften it some. talking about her nailing his head to the ground. That's pretty graphic.
We also don't teach that when David killed Goliath, we stop after the stone was thrown. We don't teach that he took his sword and cut his head off and carried it around with him. It's all about
I didn't read that.
So my preacher from many years ago, Paul Torrance, love that guy, still preaching in his 80s. We were practicing doing sermons, and we would do them for the church. And one Sunday, I was going to do one. We practiced with him and the other guys. It was men's training class, young men's training class. I mean, that's where they taught us how to baptize people and all kinds of things like that. Because if you don't know how to baptize somebody, you can mess up, I can tell you that. We baptized each other a lot. Our baptists were there, but I was doing this lesson. And who was it that killed all the men, cut off their foreskins? Who was that? Was that David? Paul Torrance got with me, said, all right, Gary, that's good. He said, look, when you're preaching that, why don't you just say he killed 100 men? Yeah, but he cut off he said, just teach he killed 100 men. It's okay. I said, got it. And I learned from it. I was like 12 years old. I can do it safer. I feel safer in here than doing it from the pulpit. But there are certain things the Bible can get very graphic that I don't necessarily use. I shared with Rhonda as I was putting all the slides and everything together. If you look up Yael and Sisera, there's a lot of paintings that were done. I said, Rhonda, do you think I ought to use this painting? And I showed it to her. Gary, she needs to cover up. You can imagine, I didn't use that picture. But it was, a lot of people's, it's neat to look at those things because a lot of those paintings, everything's from 13, 14, 15, 1600s, people that have done where their mindset was, not a present day like our mindset is versus their mindset. So anyway, I'll get on with our lesson or we will be here till 3 o'clock today. So COVID-19, the virus has led some religious people to speak with certainty about the meaning of the pandemic. Some people say this coronavirus is a sign of the end, that the conclusion of all history is upon us. Have y'all heard anything like that? These are the end times. People have been saying it's the end times for thousands of years.
Yeah, they need a plague though.
Huh?
They need pestilence.
They're saying it's the end of time, conclusion of history. Many advocates for that kind of philosophy in the last few decades. We have seen from Hal Lindsey's late great Planet Earth coming in 1968 to Tim LaHaye's Left Behind series. People have been announcing the end time is imminent. And now the coronavirus, by many people, have said it's hailed as a sign that this is all about to happen. Some have said this pandemic is God's judgment on our planet. It's the fault of all those sinners. All them sinners did this, of whom we disapprove, right? Them sinners. It's not us good Christian church. It's them sinners. Problem with all these explanations is they ignore the very center of Scripture, which is Jesus. Okay? They ignore that. Jesus does acknowledge that there are going to be wars and famines and earthquakes of evil. The Bible tells us that. But he doesn't say, so when these things happen, you should think carefully about what you and your society have done wrong. He doesn't say that. Rather, he says, when all that happens, don't allow yourselves to become distracted. Whoa. Don't allow yourselves to become distracted. This pandemic has distracted a lot of people in a lot of different ways. Some are so distracted they have nothing to do with us anymore. And when I say us, I mean in Christendom, there are people no longer attend worship or around good folks or anything else. They just quit. They became distracted. Conspiracy theories were thriving in the first century. just as they do today. There was a revolt, and in that uprising, a whole host of charismatic deliverers promising freedom and release. And then when Jesus comments on them, he draws no conclusions, but simply points to their inevitability. It's just circumstances of human life, the human experience, right? What then is the message of Scripture in the midst of all this uncertainty? Well, the New Testament insists we put Jesus at the center of the picture, and it would work outward from there. You know, trying to jump from an earthquake to a tsunami, pandemic, or anything else to a conclusion of what God is saying without going through the Gospels is like trying to do something about God while going behind Jesus' back. And while the events that are going on around us, the events of this world may impinge upon us, we need to allow Jesus to guide our response to it. We can get caught up in all the stuff going on. I think sometimes we lose our minds. Sometimes we start believing all those other things. So in this lesson today, we start at the beginning. We turn to Matthew's account. We're going to look at the beginning, the birth of Jesus. We see what a very different kind of king he is. Matthew 2, 1 and 2. After Jesus had been born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who's been born King of the Jews? We saw a star when it rose, and we come to worship him." So the announcement of Jesus as king is taken very seriously by Herod. Feels so threatened by his rival monarch that he initiates a program that leads to the killing of hundreds of babies. Another very graphic item in our Holy Bible. Sad. The designation of Jesus as king is one of the great themes of the book of Revelation. At the end of the book, someone appears wearing a robe dipped in blood, and it is announced that he's come to reign and rule. This is Revelation 19, verse 16. On his robe and on his thigh, he has this name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So this designation of Jesus as sovereign above all is absolutely accurate. We might imagine that God is a king like all human kings, except more. Kings are powerful. God is all powerful. They rule nations. He rules the universe. Since he's the King of Kings, that makes him an emperor. He's emperor of the universe. Such a God is very appealing. It's reassuring to trust in a God who's absolutely sovereign, who's in control, who's stronger, wiser, and more powerful than anyone. Do we believe this? Boy, it's sometimes hard to believe when our faith gets a little weak, when things happen around us. Lord, why is this happening? How many times have we asked God that? Lord, why is this happening? And if you're like me, and I don't want to say that you are, but oftentimes I ask the follow-up question, what have I done wrong? God, why did this happen? What have I done wrong? Where did I mess up? So if we find ourselves understanding God's sovereign in terms of imperial dominance, then we'll soon learn we're going in the wrong direction. Listen to that again. If we think and understand God's sovereignty in terms of imperial dominance, we're going to discover we're going in the wrong direction. So, it's a story of Jesus' arrival among us that corrects our faulty assumptions. In the circumstances of Jesus' birth, we see the very opposite of what we would expect from a regal king, right? We know that. We discuss this every every time we talk about the birth of Jesus. It was not normal for a king to come into the world the way he did. It's not what we expected. That's not what I was expecting. You ever said that? You ever go into a restaurant, you ordered something, and boy, it looks good. Woo! And it comes out, and you say, huh, that's not what I was expecting. You ever done that? Not
Sliced
getting
boiled turnips look just like potatoes. They don't taste like
That's true. Not what I was expecting. We'd expect the King of Kings, the King of the Jews, to be born in a palace in Jerusalem, but he arrives in a barn, or a cave, or stable in Bethlehem. We'd expect parents to be a mature priest and his righteous wife. The mature priest, his good wife, is said to become the parents of the king's herald. Remember that? Who was that? John. We would expect the officers of the Sanhedrin, the high priest and his colleagues would be the first to hear of the child's arrival. Not so. First to be informed are foreign astrologers from the east, men considered unclean by the Jews of their day. I mean, this is a messed up way for a king to come to the world. In our human eyes. We would think to announce his birth, angels would surround the temple, proclaiming the arrival of the Messiah. We would think legions of angels, hallelujah, here he is, woo! No. Instead, they appeared as shepherds, illiterate hirelings who watch the flocks of others. That is some way to come into the world when you're the king of the world. That story still just absolutely amazes me. 1991, Queen Elizabeth visited the U.S., Queen Elizabeth II. A lot of newspapers described the logistics involved in her arrival. She came with 4,000 pounds of luggage. She had 2 outfits for every occasion, and she carried 40 pints of plasma. She even brought white kid leather toilet seat covers with her. I looked that up. White kid leather toilet seats for her. But that's what we expect from royalty. You've been around British folks. You know, I've been around a lot of, well, the last time I was in Afghanistan, it was a joint operation, combined joint operation, which meant Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, as well as Brits were there with us. And they joke, they laugh, they have a good time. But boy, you say something about the Queen, you can talk all you want about their mama. You better not say anything about the Queen. I didn't. Don't get me wrong. I've been with them before, and I know that's a touchy subject. Funny thing is, too, there are some that absolutely love the Queen, would die for the Queen. Others can't stand the monarchy. That's a side note. Have any of you ever been around Brits? Y'all are? Okay. Am I kind of right on that? Okay. That's true. So we'll look at the contrast there between Queen Elizabeth to God's visit to earth in human form. He arrives in an animal shelter. His bed's a feeding trough. The most significant birth in all of human history. And there were probably more animal than human witnesses to it. The God who could order armies and empires around like pawns on a human chessboard came about in Palestine as a baby who could not speak or eat solid food or even control his bladder. He depended on a teenager for shelter, food, and love. This is an amazing story. I'm just amazed every time I read the accounts of the birth of Jesus because it just goes against the grain of what we would think. Monarch, royalty coming into this world. It has so much meaning behind it. So then, if Jesus is a king, he's not like any kings we've conceived. When we read the story of his life, we don't just see the babe in Bethlehem. We see a servant washing his disciples' feet. Could you imagine Queen Elizabeth ever washing someone's feet? No. I bet she only washed her own feet. She got 2 servants, one for the left foot and one for the right foot. We don't just observe an unexpected arrival in a manger, we encounter a deliberate death on a cross. Jesus came to die. Jesus came to die. Jesus came to die and to be resurrected. Let's don't leave that out. If Jesus is to be called king, then he is in truth the anti-king. Jesus himself acknowledged the way he reigns is a little different than the way others reign. And 2 of his right-hand men, James and John, came to him requesting positions of power and influence in this coming kingdom. He responds by redefining what power really is. Remember that story? James and John come to him? Mark 10, 41, 45, Jesus called them together and said, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. And their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant. Whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. Even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give himself as a ransom for many. World's rulers exercise power by boasting and bullying. We seeing any of that going on today? You see that happening, and Jesus said, we're going to do this a little differently. Actually, a lot differently. The greatest must be the servant. The one who wants to be first must be slave of all. And then comes the crunch here. Jesus explains that this is so because the Son of Man didn't come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Creator of the universe didn't come for us to serve him. He came to serve us. Wow, what a king. What a king. In reading these things and thinking about Jesus, in the next 4 weeks, our lessons, our sermons are going to be focused in totally on Jesus. I hate to say that. I hate to put it in those ways because all my sermons should be focused in on Jesus. Next week, we are going to be looking more closely at Jesus and some of the aspects of Jesus. And, when I hear the question, what would Jesus do? It's kind of overwhelming to me. I can't compare myself to Jesus in any way. What I do oftentimes is compare myself to other good men and women that I know, who I feel like often they look closer to Jesus than what I do, if that makes any sense. Because what would Jesus do? He would do the perfect thing. I'll do something jacked up, more than likely. He didn't come and live the way people thought a king would. He was very different. A king of a very different nature. The words of the author Derek Flood, he said, Jesus models the way of God, not as one who lords it over others, but as the servant Lord, and calls for us to embody that way too. Following Jesus means rejecting the way of domination, the way of earthly kings. He was an humble king. Jesus reveals the kind of power, sovereignty, and victory displayed in God's kingdom. We're going to be talking about the humility of Jesus in our lessons on Sunday. In so doing, he undermines our human notions of power and authority. If God sent his Son to reveal himself, then Jesus shows us how true sovereignty works. what real power does, what victory looks like in the kingdom he rules. You see, sovereignty is located in service. Power is displayed in love. Victory is found in Jesus. The King of Heavens rules and reigns, not like a monarch, but like Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus is our King, but everything about him, from his birth to his death, reveals he is a humble King. Humble. Humility is the defining attribute of Jesus' life. It's a pretty remarkable description for someone who called himself the light of the world. All right, think about that. Jesus is humble. Jesus is humble. Humility. Oh, by the way, I'm the light of the world. So, John 11:25, I'm the resurrection and the life. John 14:6, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. In contrast to such self-promoting assertions, we observe a life here that is unpretentious, self-effacing. Jesus' claims seem egocentric, but his character is modest and humble. He believed himself to be somebody, but he acted like a nobody. He called himself the Son of God, but then he took the role of a slave and became a servant. He was extremely self-centered in his words, but overwhelmingly other-centered in his deeds. Ooh, preacher, you better watch out. You saying Jesus was self-centered in his words? Yeah, he's telling people, come to me. I'm going to get you to heaven. But he was humble. In his teaching, he advanced himself. Yeah, come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, right? Come to me. I'm here for you. I got your back. In his ministry, he literally gave up himself for others. We see his self-effacement in the very circumstances of his arrival on the planet. Comes not in a raging whirlwind or a devouring fire, arrives as a child, dependent on... He comes as a child, dependent on novice parents for shelter, food, and love. Very novice. But the expressions of humility don't end there. Philippians 2:6-8. Who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, being found in appearance as a man. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. And in the cross, we clearly see the King that we serve, the kind of King. He's a king who arrives not in splendor, but in humble poverty. He leads not by controlling people, he leads by serving people. As king, he doesn't demand that others protect him at all costs. Instead, he gives his life up for them. We have seen absolutely nothing like this in the history of the world. 2,000 years ago, Jesus entered a Roman culture that elevated human pride and viewed humility as weakness. And then he changed everything. His most frequently repeated phrase was, for all those who exalt themselves will be humbled. Those who humble themselves will be exalted. Matthew 23:12, Luke 14:11, Luke 18:14. Humility. Jesus offered that assertion at least 3 times, 3 completely different contexts. The repetition helps us understand the importance of humility in his call to discipleship. And then he goes on in response to a question about greatness. He said, Matthew 18:4, whoever takes a lowly position of this child is greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Humility. Humility is the way of Christ. And it provides the way for us to walk in this pandemic. Humility. So the new way of Jesus. A lot of reasons for us to show humility in the present crisis. Circumstances change frequently. There's still a lot out there that we don't know. We still have much to learn. I don't know if we'll ever have it completely figured out regarding the pandemic. Listening to others will be essential. Keeping open minds. In the present COVID-19 pandemic, humility requires we remove ourselves from the center and in the process discover that we have been liberated. It's not all about me. Instead of being consumed with fright and fear, we find we're free to consider what's in the best interest of others. Even if the number of infections escalates, we're no longer interested in assigning blame, but look deeply within ourselves to see how we may do better. We're no longer bothered when we encounter distancing restrictions we don't agree with. I hear people fussing and fighting about that. You know, if somebody wants to keep their distance from me, that's okay, but that was going on long before the pandemic. They still go away from me. I say, Rhonda, please. We don't have to social distance anymore. What's this 20 feet?
Everyone else is doing things.
Don't climb under a blanket this afternoon.
We brought separate cars to church. I guess it's a good thing, right?
They're milking that coffee.
I done stirred up the women folk, guys. Good luck going home, hide the tent pegs, and don't drink milk.
Talk about us, you don't talk about Rhonda.
Click. Okay. So, in the first chapter of his book, The Body Broken, Jack Reese warns the church of the delusion of certainty. He reminds us there's much about God and faith that we do not know, and when we claim instead that we certainly do know, it only moves us down the path towards arrogant self-righteousness. There's a lot I don't know about the Bible. There's a lot that I still learn. Y'all heard me jokingly say before, I wish I was 16 again because I pretty much knew it all. And, you know, I was raised in a good church where we were taught. We used to do that Sunday nights, get there early, and the young girls and young guys would go up front, and we would learn the books of the Bible. How many books in the Bible? 66, right? How many in the Old Testament? 39. New Testament? 27. All these things. And then the apostles, what was that song? Peter and John. And you sing the song, anyway, that's the way I learned that, but I can't do the song right now, not that I should. But, you know, we learned those things. And a lot of times I was learning about God, and it was good stuff. I'm not saying it was not. I'm so happy we did that. But knowing God, learning about God, is two different things. A lot of atheists know all about God, maybe more than what we do, but they don't know God. And so going along with this, there's still stuff that I don't know. I don't. People come to me sometimes with deep questions about stuff, and my first question to them is, why are you bringing this? What do you need to know about this? I mean, where did this come from? Oftentimes, and I'm talking stuff kind of out there, so to speak. What made this come up? But there's some different things. I don't know why God acted the way He did in certain aspects of the Bible. I don't. I've heard different reasons and thoughts given. I've read books on different things, but still, when it gets right down to it, I don't. And I think we get to a point where we have all the answers. We leave ourselves open to be very arrogant, very self-righteous in that. The problem is not in acknowledging certainty of God's center of things. The delusion comes when we assume we have mastered the certainties and have this church thing totally figured out. Y'all got this church thing figured out yet? No. Rather than demanding certainty in life and faith, we need to learn to embrace uncertainty. And humility will equip us to do that. Life is uncertain. Oh, we were smacked in the face with it with the death of our beloved brother, John McFarland, right? Very uncertain. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to comment that the book of Job is an excellent case study in thinking you know what God wants and why God does what he does, and how he feels about what you think.
Yes, that is. Y'all might not have heard that. Book of Job is excellent to read, thinking you got it all figured out. His friends came to help him, and they did help him as long as they were quiet, right? And in the book of Job says, and then they started to speak, and it went downhill from there, because what they were saying was not good. So, yeah, and then God lets them all have it. Where were you when I did this and did that? I'd have hated to be in that audience. Boy, talk about being reprimanded.
Kind of conversation you hate to be in the next room, too.
Oh, yeah? So in the present crisis, fear and trepidation will always be before us. There's so much about the future we cannot know. When we begin to truly reflect the humble path, we find ourselves living comfortably in an uncertain future. We can now accept that which is unknown. Embracing uncertainty removes knowledge from the center, replaces it with Jesus. When Jesus recaptures the center, we'll more clearly hear the words he speaks. Fear not, stay calm, trust in me. So in our next lesson, we're actually going to be looking at a specific event in the life of Jesus. As we talk about COVID-19. So I had some questions up here for discussion. We don't have to discuss them now. You know, if you have any comments on these. Where in Scripture do you see the humility of Jesus clearly expressed? When you tend to become prideful, self-absorbed? Has pride led you to problems in your own life? Probably so. Who do you know who is truly humble? How has pride displayed itself in this COVID-19 pandemic? When does facing uncertainty become especially difficult for you? We don't like uncertainty. How are you dealing with the uncertainty of the present pandemic? Those are just some things you can think about. We don't have to necessarily come to any kind of answers on those. Pandemic kind of shook our world a little bit. All of us, things, you know, our lives that were going in such order, so to speak. I mean, we go to church on Sunday, we do this, we do that. We go to work or hobbies or whatever, all these things, dental appointments, doctor's appointments, all this stuff that was going on. And then everything was like shaking all up, said, nope, you're not doing that. And life stopped for a little while. And for a little bit, they're saying, okay, wait, we need just mission essential people. We got to have people that, we got to have these people. Everybody stay home. Our world was shaking. Very uncertain times. And now, you know, I think most of us feel like, well, we're coming out of this. Are we? Was it yesterday or maybe this morning? I was looking at the news and there's another variant that might be there and all. Now, I understand with news, they're looking at anything to get readership or clicks, but it's probably something we're going to have with us from now on. And there'll be variants and all, like the flu. But what I'm saying today doesn't really matter with all that. What I'm saying today is trust in Jesus and do the things that you feel like you need to do. If people feel like they need to still wear a mask, I ain't got a problem with that. Wear a mask. I've had numerous people that ask me to wear a mask. Several today. I'm joking. Y'all didn't get that. Y'all know, why don't you do it? That's okay. I mean, you do what you feel like you need to do during this time to feel safe or whatever it is. But ultimately, trust in God. Be humble about it.
It was interesting that we used to think of a quote unquote good Christian as somebody who was there every Sunday, you know, who participated in the prayer and giving and communion, and then all of a sudden all that stopped. So did we eliminate all good Christians?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a crazy thing.
Times changed. The way us doing worship and services and everything, a lot has changed. I mentioned this morning, the way we quote unquote do church has changed a little bit, and I kind of like some of the changes, to be honest with you, and maybe there are some others that we can make. But nevertheless, it's time for us to reevaluate our worship, our walk with God. Anyway, that's all I have. Let's see, we got any other pictures? Oh, there she is.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, fired her up for the first time the other day. That Chevy engine fired up, and she sounded so pretty. Yeah. Okay, I'll sign autographs later. But anyway, getting ready to head out in it for long. I'll send pictures when I get work. Any questions? No? I love explaining everything so perfectly that there's never any questions. Thanks, guys. We'll see y'all next week.
You're amazing.